Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant, and you are not mistaken. We are actually doing another show, and we just did a show. When did we do that? Thursday, and now it's Monday, so just a few days later. So sometimes we go like 2 weeks or 3 weeks between shows, and then sometimes we go 2 or 3 days. So we just want to keep you guys on your toes.
It works out really well to have a distinct plan that we lay out, that we tell people about.
Consistency is key. That's what they say when you're podcasting.
For the live shows in particular, it's like, but it's like those pop-up. You ever hear those, like the pop-up restaurants or whatever, that are like, you got to like know somebody who knows somebody, and you get word like last second, or if it's your favorite, like a food truck or whatever, right? And they pop
what
up
we
on
are.
Instagram. Yeah, we're like a food truck. Except
we're like a pop-up.
There's no
pop-up
food.
webcast / podcast.
Yeah, we'll just show up. You never know when. Although I guess at the same time, it's you don't have to consume. You can have our leftovers, right? Because of the stuff stays on YouTube and with the pod format, so you can catch up on us whenever you need to.
There you go. Yeah, I like that. So here we are. I mean, the whole point of us doing the show today was we thought, all right, hey, the owners are going to make an offer, counter proposal for the CBA agreement on Saturday. We were all teed up for that and excited, thinking we were going to have something to talk about today. And then it was just kind of like a turd in the wind.
I mean, it's what's funny, right? Is like, and the players so far. Here's what's funny is, you can tell from whence the national people are getting their news and getting their talking points based on what they like. So Jim Bowden, aka Ralph, who has me blocked, so I only see his stuff like if somebody shares it or does a screen cap of it when they do. But he was like, well, the players now need to make a meaningful, the owners have made, like, no, dude, the owners have not made. So if somebody's talking to you about the owners making significant moves or making concessions or moving in the right direction, like, no, that's the players have proactively chosen to give up on major changes to free agency and service time and other stuff. Now, the owners did make some small changes, right? They have come up a little bit on the minimum salary. They've come up a little bit on a bonus pool. They've gone up a little bit on the CBT threshold at the high end. However, they also want to put bigger penalties into the CBA or CBT. So it doesn't matter if you raise it. And here's the thing, quick math, right? $2 million, like to you and I, $2 million is a lot. But when you put that in the face of what is currently, or what had been, a $210 million threshold, you're talking about less than 1%. That's not as much as inflation, especially lately, for as much as we're all bitching about it. So like if you got a 2% raise at work, or a less than 1%, if you got a 0.875% raise, you'd be like, cool, that means I'm actually making less money this year than I did last year, because shit costs more. And you didn't increase my salary by the amount of the cost of living increase. And so, you're actually not increasing that much, especially if you have bigger penalties. So, and they're still far apart. I mean, I do think, though, what it signals, which has been the case the whole time, is that owners are, I think, willing or able, however you want to phrase that, to make much, much larger moves in terms of their offer, but they are intentionally stringing this thing along and going in very, very small increments, because they know damn well they're very comfortable losing some spring training games. And clearly at this point, I think it's obvious they're comfortable losing some regular season games, because they're not moving meaningfully to meet the players to the same extent that the players have actually come from their offers to come down to more of a midpoint with the owners. So it's disheartening, but hopefully some stuff happens this week that we see, those sides get a little bit closer in terms of what they're, and I'm not both sidesing it. I just mean that the gap between the two, however that happens, grows smaller. I hope we'll see that this week.
Yeah. I mean, nothing really changed, to be honest with you. I mean, the owners went from 10 million to 15 million on the pre-arb pool proposal, which is really nothing compared to where the players wanted to be, which originally I think was 125. and they went down to 100
It
million.
was 115, and then they went to 100, and then 105, I believe, is where they've
Okay.
gotten to.
So that around $100 million.
Yeah.
So when you're around when one side says $100 million and the other side says $10 million,
Yeah.
and then the next proposal is 15, that's not even, why even make a proposal? And so that's kind of the thing that's frustrating to me, is it's like, to me, there's a way to negotiate in what's called good faith. And that is to say that you're actually making an honest effort to move a negotiation forward, in light of all the different things that are part of that negotiation. And at this point, I think it's fair to say that the owners are not negotiating in good faith. They are not moving in any way, shape, or form, in any material way. Not even close. I mean, you can't. And that's the thing, is that if the owners, and I don't even think they're. I mean, I think that what the owners are saying, and what Manfred said the other day was, "Hey, we've made a good offer." He must be referring to the very first offer, because nothing has really changed since then. And what have they only made 2 proposals up to this point?
Yeah, this is either the second or the third. I will say, however, there's a little bit of optimism in the fact that they have come off of some things. They gave a couple choices for the minimum, and neither of them is perfect by any point, but you've got one which is saying, hey, we'll raise the minimum from right now it's $570,500. We'll raise that minimum to $630. It'll be a flat for those first 3 years, but teams can offer raises to that if they want. So that, that's 60,000. That's a little bit more than 10%. So that's not bad. It's still,
but it's standard
not great.
coming into a CBA. That number almost always goes up,
right?
So it's not
and
really much of a gift.
That's where they probably should have been. The other one would go 615 for the first year, but it would scale up to 725. And so, that would be, again, a little bit. It's not what the player, the players have wanted. They want 775. Like, they want that to be the short end. So when you do combine the two and they say, hey, we want 775 and we want $100 million bonus pool, and the owners are like, how about 630 and 15? Like, that's okay. That's not really, but I do think it's indicative of, again, when people foolishly say, well, the players are being greedy. They want somebody like commented, I think it was Facebook, like, the players just want $1 billion contracts. I'm like, no, in point of fact, it's pretty obvious that they're trying to get more money to the people in the first 3 years, which realistically, again, for owners, those are the players that represent the greatest value. I mean, that's why they want them to continue to be as valuable as possible, because that's where you see the biggest return in terms of, if you look at it just purely from an investment perspective. And I know I don't mean to be dehumanizing or anything, but the owners are looking at it that way, right? That's exactly how they look at their labor force. It's an investment.
Well, and I saw
they want
something
that
that
at the
said
low end.
over 60% of the players in Major League Baseball the last 2 years have been pre-arb players.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big number.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. And that's not even necessarily young guys. I mean, Frank Schwindel and Patrick Wisdom fall into that. Those guys are, 30-year-olds. So a lot of that, like that, those guys spent, and then that's a whole nother reason to raise that minimum, because those guys have been toiling away in the minors for the most part with an occasional cup of coffee here and there, but they're not making that much money.
Making like 6-7 grand a year.
Yeah. If you're 30 and you're just now getting your first year of service time, you've spent a lot of, like, even if you played college ball, you spent almost a decade in the minors, right? And granted, by the time you get to minor league free agency, you can make a little bit more money. It's not like you're making $5 grand a year or anything like that, but it's still, and it's a difficult setup. I mean, so that's something they've been grinding away at. And but again, it's very transparent. If the owners were truly motivated, right, they had the chance to make this offer. I still don't think, even if they had, spring training starts on time, but if they had on the 10th or 11th, it was the 11th, I guess, right? Or 12th. That was the 12th. Sorry. Don't know what my dates are. There's no way they turn that around in 3 days, because original report dates are supposed to be tomorrow, right? You don't get guys, but you can get a lot. I mean, if there's some of those guys have their off-season homes in those areas anyway. Yeah. Again, as I like somebody like Chris Bryant, right? Let's take somebody in that realm or there and above. These guys have powerful agencies, they have management companies, They make one phone call, somebody's showing up at their house, they're putting their cars on a flatbed or they're loading them up, they got their stuff packed, boom, you get down there. Again, a lot of them have off-season homes, they've got apartments, they've got whatever. Yep. They could make that work, especially when you're talking pitchers and catchers. And you know, you get a couple weeks before that first game anyway, right? So they could still kind of salvage the games, but it's pretty obvious, again, the owners knew they weren't going to get an agreement based on the offer they put out. So as you said, in good faith, I don't even think they knew. Like, to me, if they had come out and said 650, 675 as a minimum and maybe 50 or 60 million dollars in the bonus pool, now that's good faith. That's a marked movement and something that I think the players would actually have to chew on. Although, again, I will say this, some of the players, they were underwhelmed by it, but I do think the players also looked at it and said, you know, it's not as shitty as what we thought it was going to be. That's something that we kind of heard out there. So it wasn't insultingly bad. It just wasn't indicative of something that was meant to work. And so that tells me the owners still need the players to counter. The owners are going to have to counter at least one more time, if not two. And so we're looking at something that at best drags through this week.
This feels like the high school trope of who wants to say I love you first. Like the value of, you know, since it's Valentine's Day, I thought we'd go there. But, you know, it's like, you know, does it really matter? I mean, it's like, so the owners, they don't want to be the first ones to make the significant move. They want the players to be the first one to make the significant, and then the players want the owners. And so we're getting into semantics. It's not really negotiating. The process and the ends is not in sight, I don't think. It just doesn't seem like they're really they're kind of playing high school games to me. I don't know. It seems like, you know, they're not being productive, I would say. And I don't know if it's, I personally, I blame the owners because it's just like they have not done anything in this whole process.
They waited 6 weeks to make their first offer. 6 weeks. Yeah. And that, to me, you knew the process was not going to be offer A, offer B, acceptance in the space of a couple days. Like, we knew that wasn't going to happen, right? Yeah. It's not like you go in and offer a play. If there's a home for sale and you offer 10% above asking price, well, you know you're going to get an agreement immediately. Well, that was never going to be the case here. So by waiting 6 weeks, the owners have, again, effectively, they punted on first down, they punted, right? And then they just waited.
It's like 1st and 5.
Yeah, they punted, and then they just used all their timeouts immediately. They waited on that whole time. And then the process only got started meaningfully, you know, well into January at that point, which is really bizarre. It's like, I don't know. Am I back now? Did you lose me for a second there? Good.
Yeah, we lost you for a sec.
But yeah, I mean, when you wait that long, it's pretty obvious. And I guess, speaking of which, I do want to address this. Eric's been asking this in our comments here about testing. It's not that there was some kind of an agreement that they're not going to test, but the drug testing policy is a part of the collective bargaining agreement. So with no collective bargaining agreement in place, there is no testing protocol in place. So until such time as that comes back into play, as of December 2nd, those players could have been juicing, you know, and
but as soon as it comes back into effect, right, they can test them.
Tested again. But here's the thing, and I wrote about this a while back. So if you want to look it up, you can see some of that. But if I'm an injured player who is unsigned, you better be damn sure. I would be taking some HGH like crazy, man, to overcome. Like, if I had surgery or some kind of an injury, especially at the end of last season, if I'm looking for that next big deal and I want to make sure I get signed, I want to make sure I'm healthy going into camp, I'm taking whatever I can. First of all, a lot of that stuff is so undetectable right now. And a lot of people look at steroids and are like, oh, big hulking muscle men. That's really not the big key to this. It's getting that HGH and being able to recover quickly. You're talking about an off-season workout program, which you're lifting heavier. You're trying to rehab an injury, something like that, where you want to go after it. Man, I'd be all over that because, hey, there's no testing protocol and you're not even signed. You know what I mean? So you can, oh shit, I got to take another week for this stuff to clear out of my system. Cool, no problem. I got time. So I would absolutely be taking advantage of this window right now. But that's just me. I can say that in hypothetical because,
well, I mean, you're weighted up right now, actually.
Well, yeah.
People don't know this, but the reason Evan is such a good writer is because he's roided.
Yep, I am on all kinds of different illicit substances. Doing my 16-ounce curls and injecting lots of stuff into my rear end. But no, it is like there's a lot of stuff like that though that goes into like that is one of the items, right? Like those things. There's a lot of the joint drug testing program, the domestic violence policy, things like that are all in there. They're a joint deal. Or you look at, and there's tons of stuff in the CBA that is not up for debate or question, like that they can all kind of just boilerplate, right? And they're all cool with it. It's the core economic stuff that's really at play, because the CBA, I think we talked about this, CBA itself is like a pretty massive document, most of which would put you to sleep if you read more than, half a page of it. It's all like referencing back to certain little weird rules and other things that again is like no player even wants to go through that. That's all stuff for the lawyers. But I mean, realistically, if we're talking about if the owners would come down from, if they would, I mean, hell, you could keep the CBT stuff all the same and just increase the levels, I think. And if they came up a little bit on a lot on the bonus pool, but a little bit on minimum salaries, a lot more on that bonus pool, man, I think you'd almost have an agreement, because they're already cool on the DH. The expanded playoffs are a thing we'll see there, but I think both sides are cool with expanded playoffs.
Well, I love how Manfred is
lottery.
like, let's go over the things that we agree on. We agree on the expanded playoffs. Like, I mean, I watched his speech like 10 times the other day, and no kidding, you're in agreement on the expanded playoffs. And I don't know that the athletes, the players, they don't get paid any more money.
They get a pool. There's bonus pools in the playoffs.
But do they get more money for expanded playoffs?
Yeah, because if there's another round, and if the pool is bigger, right? Because it's based on gate and stuff like that. That's why it kind of sucked in 2020, because there's no gate until they got to the World Series. So they do get a little bit, not as big a percentage as what the teams get, right?
The owners are making this. I mean, that's the breadwinner for the owners is the postseason, right? I mean, that's where they get I'd like to see the breakout. I don't know that we'll ever get the breakout of what that advertising revenue looks like in the postseason versus the regular season, but it's substantial.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a reason too that like ESPN dropped most of their games, right? Because it's just not as lucrative in the regular season. It's not as big a return for the broadcasters. That's why they're not paying as much. But I think, there are. I will say, I thought it was fairly meaningful that that MLB went with the draft pick compensation for teams that keep a top prospect up, and if he's on the roster the whole season and wins an award, that they can get a pick, and that actually applies to the first 2 years of that player's career. So you can get 2 picks. So like the Cubs, had they brought Chris Bryant up at the very start of the 2015 season, would have earned an extra draft pick for him winning Rookie of the Year, and then they would have won an extra pick or been awarded an extra pick for him winning the MVP in his second year. So, but that's keeping him on the roster from the start instead of manipulating his service time for those 11 games. So now you've got the whole idea is, gosh, we've got this guy in here. We should have a better team because he's a really good player, and we're getting free draft picks as a result. So
it's hard to make that decision, though, don't you think? Because it's like you don't know that he's going to be good enough to get to that level. And I don't know, what is it, top 3 in those awards or something like that?
I think so. But I mean, if you're looking at saying, I mean, and Bryant was a fairly, like, dude was clearly good enough to have been on the team. I mean, no offense to Mike Old, but like, let's be honest here. And when it's one of those like, oh, we got to work on his glove, or like Vlad Guerrero Jr., who then like tore his hamstring right at the end of spring training, I think, before what should have been his, he should have been up, but they were saying, oh, we're going to leave him in the minors. Like that, again, clearly a case of service time manipulation, or would have been had he not been hurt, right? Because like that dude was very much good enough to have been on the opening day roster. And I think that's the part of it is like for those guys, some of them, Greg Huss wrote for us about Brennan Davis, right? Saying, hey, look, he's barely got even a full season of professional experience. He's had some injuries. They had the 2020 season that was missed. Like, that's not service time manipulation. And there's a difference there. If a guy is down for like 6 months, in most of the season, then comes up in September because he had a really good, That's not service time manipulation. That's allowing him to get better. If a guy is down for 10 or 11 days and then comes up the day after that you need for a full year of service, as was the case with Bryant, that's entirely different. So I do think it's, hey, if a team could say, geez, this guy's good enough, like definitely good enough to be up with our team, we need him up now. Now, what if he comes up and he sucks and you got to send him back down? Like, that'll happen. But I think with the Cubs, there were a lot of cases with like Javier Baez, he kind of got pushed a little bit, had some things he could have worked on. And he had some, he had that broken finger there for a while, but he had some up and down there early with the big strikeouts. They've already agreed to universal DH. So we'll put that out there. Just I'm kind of talking out loud with the comments. Yeah, that's already done. Kyle Schwarber was another one. Came up real quick, hit a ton, and then had to go back down. And there's a dude who's now playing in Mexico or Korea or something, who for a long time people thought was just an awesome shortstop and whatever, before he turned out to be just a piece of trash domestic abuser, who also came up really, really quick and had some significant issues in his play that overall kind of showed themselves, plural. And, he's no longer even playing professional baseball in the majors or in the minors. He's somewhere else. I don't know. But I think we saw that. Like, they rushed a lot of these guys up and then never even really, I don't want to say they didn't bother with their development at the majors, but boy, I sure think the Cubs felt like, hey, we're good. These guys are all awesome right off the gate. We don't have to keep doing work with them. No, don't need any of that. Ian Happ is another one who had to go back down and work through some things with Chris Valleca in the minors. So anyway, that was kind of neither here nor there, I guess, in the greater point. But for those few players, I think, who will have their service time manipulated, like, it sucks. There's not that many guys, though. As much as I hate the idea of the service time manipulation thing, the way they do it, there are not that many players every year who teams are doing this to blatantly, right? Like that, where it's like, well, the day after. But if there's a way that you can eliminate that, I think it's good, man. I think that's a good little deal that's in there.
Yeah, and it depends on the circumstances too, right? I mean, like this year, the Cubs aren't gonna, win any. If they do, it'd be very, very unexpected. Whereas, back when Chris Bryant was coming up in 2015, the Cubs had a pretty good team, and so it was thought that they could possibly contend, and they should start contending around that time. And that's where the service time manipulation kind of came into play. It's like the Cubs needed Chris Bryant on the team. It was clear that they needed him. Whereas right now they're in no hurry to get any of the prospects up, just because they're not in a window, and they're not at the beginning of a window, I don't think, or in the middle of a window where they need to win now, where they could reasonably expect to kind of make the playoffs. Whereas, back in 2015, and that's where the service time manipulation really starts to get shady, right? It's where you can clearly see the situation is such that that is exactly what they're doing. They don't admit it. The teams don't admit it, but they do say things like, we're just following the rules.
Right. Well, here's what I love. Here's the funny thing to me, right? So let's say, if I'm driving my car, okay, and there's a car in front of me, and I'm in the right lane on the interstate, and that car's not going as fast as what I would like. I put on my turn signal, I get into the left lane, I pass them, I get back. I manipulated my steering wheel to make the car go left, and then I manipulated the turn signal, right? Like, calling it manipulation there's a lot of times people say, oh, they didn't manipulate his service time, they were well within the rules. Like, no, you moron, they still manipulated it. Like, they still held him down for 11. Whether it was according to the letter of the law is beside the point. Like, they still, so yes, by holding him down, by keeping him there, moving him over to the right lane, if you will, letting some other people pass, they get back over, like, because it's within the rules technically, which actually there are some assumed things in there that that are not, even if it's not by the letter of the law, like the whole idea is you're supposed to be operating in good faith. And that was clearly not in good faith. Like, he was definitely better. Oh, we need him to work on his defense. Okay, a week and a half in the minors is going to just miraculously improve someone's defense at the age of 22 or whatever, right? Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But it's funny because people see manipulation and they're like, they did something illegal or they did something no one's ever done. But like, no, that's not what that means. But they very clearly did set this up so they could get an extra year of service time for him. It's patently obvious.
Like, well, and that's if you're in a negotiation and the person sitting across the table from you says, you guys have a conversation, you're in agreement on something, and they say, hey, listen, in this situation, obviously we're not going to do that. Don't ever say, oh, okay. No, put that in writing. There's a reason that these things need to be put in writing, and there's a reason that this becomes such a contentious process too. It's because when you're negotiating with people, a lot of times the people that are sitting at the table will have agreement on an issue. But the problem a lot of times in negotiations is that agreement doesn't necessarily get papered properly. And then people in the future who weren't party to that first agreement, or maybe who were and just wanted to manipulate it in a bad way, are party to it. Mm-hmm. It's why these negotiations are so important, particularly for the players in a system that I'm going to say monopsony, I guess is the word, right? Where the players create a lot more value than they're getting compensated. So the owners are the ones benefiting from the value that the players are creating, and it's not fair at all. And so, but the issue is that the players don't have another employer. There's nowhere else that Major League Baseball players can go. You can say Japan, you can say other countries, but at the end of the day, there's nowhere else for Major League Baseball players to go than Major League Baseball. There is no other way to make a living playing baseball than playing within the Major League Baseball system in the United States. And I mean, again, they could go to Japan or something like that, but that's just not, this is the country we all live in, and so it's frustrating to know the system, the way that it's been set up with the antitrust exemption that the Major League Baseball owners have, the fact that the way I think we should get into this too is the minor league system and the way that it's set up. There's a lawsuit that's currently set to go to trial beginning on June 1st in California, where minor leaguers are taking Major League Baseball and have been for 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I guess you can give some more information and detail on that. You wrote a piece on that the other day, but it's just, they're minor leaguers, they get nothing. I mean, they literally get nothing. So they all have to have other jobs while they're trying to compete to be Major League Baseball players. And it's like an impossibility to do. If you think about it, how they do it, I don't know.
Yeah, and before I get into that, I want to amend my my analogy from the other day, because I was talking about passing. It would be more akin to, let's say I'm on a 2-lane interstate. Thank God they're doing some construction on I-65 and expanding most of that all the way, because there's so many damn trucks there. But let's say it's a 2-lane section and I got a truck that's there, and the speed limit 65, and I pull into the left and I set my cruise at 65 miles an hour. Because, damn it, I'm obeying the speed limit. Am I within my legal rights as a driver? Absolutely. I'm doing everything right. I signaled, I got over there, but I'm being an asshole. If I'm driving 65 in the left lane with a truck doing the same speed next to me, and I'm backing everybody up behind me, I'm within my rights. It's totally legal. Yeah, but it's not the right thing to do. Get your ass around the truck and let people get past you. That's kind of the whole thing when people say, well, they didn't manipulate your service time. It was perfectly fine. All right, dick. Well, then the next time I see you driving the speed limit or a mile an hour below in the left lane on a perfectly sunny day on 65, I'm flipping you the bird, or I'm at least tailgate. But anyway, no. So here's the issue, right? And this is what's so funny about it. It's not funny, but actually it sort of is. So MLB has retained the services of a high-powered legal team, right, to argue this. Lawyers who are being paid like $700 an hour, or the retainers, like whatever the cost comes to. So that $750, $775 an hour, Well, that's $775 more than minor leaguers get paid for the entirety of spring training. All minor leaguers together. And Major League Baseball is arguing that not only is it a training program, right? It is spring training, and as such, it is not actually game, although they are playing games, but they're saying, well, we shouldn't have to pay him because it's a training program. And really, when you think about it, if you look at like the IMG Academy in Florida, if you think about what a professional lesson would cost or training would cost for an hour at a time or whatever, really it's the equivalent of them being paid $2,200 because they're getting the highest level of instruction and yada, 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 right? So it's so funny to me because I'm thinking like, in what other world would you be in any job, you know, does your job send you for a month every year off to learn how to do your job better and then not pay you for that because you're doing training? Would anybody accept that? You're a plumber, you're a pipe fitter, you're a mason, you're an executive, you're a salesman. Does your job send you away for 5 or 6 weeks and say, hey, we're not going to pay you, but get this. You're going to be learning so much from this that you would otherwise have paid money for. We're going to provide you this training for free. So that's really like being paid. You know, that's the big issue. And, you know, somebody was bringing it up and I made an analogy to being a writer and being unpaid at some of these places. And there is a comment out there and, you know, and they were complimentary of me. And I get that. And they presented some things. Say, well, you know, now that I've got this, and once they work their way up, they can make more. But I'm thinking, yeah, but every year, like this guy could be in the minors for 5 or 6 years. It's not as if it's his first go round. It's not as if this is some high school kid whose parents are paying for him to attend a camp, you know, a showcase or something like that, so he can be seen by scouts. These guys are in a system already. They're under contract to play for that organization. They don't have a choice on whether or not to show up to this camp. They don't get to choose which camp they attend. So the team is saying, you must be here. Here's when you have to report. By the way, we're not going to pay you because the value that you're getting in experience that we are actually footing the bill for, we're paying these coaches to train you. So you should be thankful for that experience, even though you're only getting paid $5,000 or $10,000 otherwise. So it's really asinine when you think about, like, dude, it's a pittance for what you'd have to pay these guys, you know. And again, before the end of my rambling here is I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so let's think about the mental side of the game. Let's think about things other than just actually playing baseball, learning baseball. Like the ability to not be afraid of, you know, how are you going to pay your rent or your lease or make your car payment or not having to bunk up with 5 other guys. Yeah, just be able to eat. And so I get it, you know, if they're providing them a little bit of a per diem, but it's like, okay, if you're saying we're not paying you, but we have a 24-hour food service, we're going to pay for all your housing costs, we're going to pay your transportation costs and give you a per diem and do all this stuff. If they're doing all of that, that's one thing. But the fact that, like, I would just maybe as a team owner not want to have players who are worried about food insecurity. And is good food cheap? No. Like, I don't want these guys going out there and buying like spam and bologna and ramen. You know what I mean? And just eating that, just going like high sodium, high fat, eat what you can because it's cheap. I'm wanting to provide them with the best of the best. And there's also the incentive of like, hey, if you treat your players right, that gets around. You know what I mean? That helps you out as an organization. So dude, it's silly. I just don't know why teams are even doing it because it seems like such a stupid thing that could be made so much better so easily.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. And so there's this lawsuit, though. Well, we can go back to, was it the Save America's Pastime Act that passed in, was it 2018, which made it okay for Major League Baseball to not pay a minimum wage based on the FSLA, the Fair Standards Labor Act or Agreement or whatever it's called.
Which is wild. Like, who crafts that? Who says, you know what, we should actually restrict the pay of the guys who are already not being paid very much? Like,
well, and then it passed.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just that bill. It was like you know, tucked into, was it the budget? The federal budget?
It was something, but like
I think it was.
how many owners, baseball team owners, and how many politicians like truly understand what it's like to bootstrap your way up and to actually work a low paying job because you have to, right? Like not just because you're from a wealthy family and you can intern at TD Ameritrade in college because daddy owns the company, right? Or
Yeah.
because you have this family industry and you're already independently wealthy, you know, that, oh, well, I worked all these. And I think that's the issue though, right? And I'm not meaning to, I certainly don't want to excuse those folks, but a lot of these people who are making laws and who are making these decisions don't actually understand at all what their constituency or their labor force or anything like that. They don't understand what that's actually like. They don't know what it's like. I mean, I don't either, but like they don't understand that this 16-year-old kid from the Dominican has never had any money, or maybe they do. And they're like, well, shit, we don't need to pay him. He's used to not having anything.
I think
But
it's more of that.
well, that's part of it. But I do think a lot of them, like, they look at this and say, well, unpaid internships are the way of the world. That's how this all goes. Well, yeah, for you, because you didn't need to worry about it because your per
because your
diem
dad has
because
$20
your
million.
dad has, right. He's got tons of money. So you never had to worry about that in your life. You don't care. And how many great players, potentially great players, is the sport losing out on because at 18, 19 years old, you know, maybe this is their first experience of it. Maybe they got drafted high enough, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they couldn't go to college. Maybe they just didn't want to go to college. I don't know. They get drafted, but then they're going through this period where they're not making much money. They're bunking up so much they're not able to eat as well. They're away from home. There's a lot of maybe psychological and then physical things because they're not being able to develop as well that push them out of the game by 20. And had those things been taken care of more appropriately, you're looking at the next Mike Trout. Now, I guess flip side of that is, well, if it was the next Mike Trout, he should have pushed his way through, or he would have gotten a bigger signing bonus or something like that. But I mean, I just, it's silly to me if I look at this just from a purely logical standpoint, not the emotional side of I just think it's dumb to not pay these guys. But in another way that it's dumb to not pay them is why, if you are truly looking for the greatest value out of a player who is going to provide you the most impact when he's making the lowest amount of money, when he gets those first 3 years, why would you not want to do everything in your power to fully develop mentally, physically, nutritionally, all of these young players at 17, 18, 19, 20 years old so that they can move their way through the system and be more advanced at an earlier age, and you can pay them less money than you would for their counterparts who are making millions and millions more. From a purely business perspective, it makes so much more sense to just pay these guys for a few extra weeks. It's really weird to me why MLB is stuck on this. It's so silly.
Well, and if you want to use, signing bonuses to kind of counter, oh, hey, they've received a signing bonus. Let's remember that there's slot values assigned. There's pools that are now that teams aren't supposed to exceed, and if they do exceed, there's financial penalties for exceeding the pool in the draft. And so they've limited the ability, because it used to be way different. I mean, it used to be that top draft picks could basically say, hey, listen, this is what I'm going to sign for, or I'm just not going to sign. And if a team couldn't afford that, well, they just wouldn't draft that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's all based on slot values, and the players have no choice. They have to
and
sign.
It's a much shorter draft now too. So if you don't get drafted, now you can kind of negotiate that for yourself. But if you're not, it's only 20 rounds. You know what I mean? Now and some of that kind of came out of the 2020 was only 5 rounds. And then you're talking about like $10,000 bonuses, to guys who came out of college. So if, hey, you just spent 3 or 4 years playing college ball. Now you're getting signed for like $10,000, $25,000. That ain't going too far. And now you're not getting paid to show up to spring training, and you're trying to figure all these things out. And it's just, again, I think it's, it's difficult. I know a lot of people are like, hey, they're playing a game for a living. And I know, hey, a lot of them
it's
do
not easy, man.
Right. It's
just,
not.
There are people who love finance, and they are doing finance for a living. And there's not much of a difference, to be honest with you. Just because you're playing baseball doesn't mean it's less hard. In fact, I think it's more hard, more difficult, perhaps
harder
than let's say finance. Okay. Finance is easy. Once you got it, man. And if you're good at it, you're good at it.
You
That's
don't get
just
the
it.
yips. You don't get
Yeah,
the
you
yips
don't
and start.
you
You
don't
don't
have
start
people
putting stuff in the
watching
wrong
you.
column on the spreadsheet. Like, fuck, I can't even get to the. I can't even get to column F. I don't know how to auto sum anymore. Yeah. Shit, I can't write a formula. That doesn't. Does anybody come in like this? Does a rival accountant ever come at you and like just ruin all your shit? Like throw a curveball into the middle of your spreadsheet? Does that ever happen? Right? That's
Never.
no.
Never.
Do you have to
There's no
worry about
problems
eating?
there. And
It's
so we've got one of our commenters is saying that the majority of the blame goes for the owners, but there is blame on the MLBPA. There is no blame on the MLBPA. This goes back to
well,
the
they
reserve
they
agreements.
could do a little bit more, maybe, but yeah, I don't blame it because the union doesn't have control over it. Now they could try to extend that to them, but anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah, they're not. So the players, the minor league players, are not unionized, and the reason that Major League Baseball teams can't own them basically is because of this reserve agreement that exists, which says that once the player is drafted and signed, the team owns the player. They cannot go play anywhere else, and that is due to antitrust exemption. Without that antitrust exemption, the reserve agreement would go bye-bye, and that would not exist. Now, what the minor league system would look like is anybody's guess, because maybe there wouldn't even be a minor league system, but it's hard to imagine Major League Baseball without a minor league system. Here's what it would do. It would cost the owners a whole lot more money is what it would do, which is why they don't want to go down that road, because they know there has to be a minor league system. Baseball is so much different than football and basketball. I mean, like the skills that are required to excel in baseball and the mental side of it is so much that needs to be developed there. It's not just something where an athlete can just be a freak. Occasionally that happens in baseball. Chris Bryant's a good example of it, but still he was in the minors for what, 2-3 years?
One and change really.
Okay. But he was in the minors at the end of
Yeah.
the day. And is basically the minor league system is really necessary, I think, in baseball, much more so than it is in any other sport. And you also see the players, the average age of these younger players coming up is, in their mid to upper 20s. I mean, these guys are hitting the major leagues typically, when they're at the middle of their careers, whereas in the NBA and the NFL, they're far younger when they enter the league.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're getting drafted, you are expected in those other sports to be maybe not necessarily an impact, but like to make the roster and be a player actively from the very start. Maybe in a backup role, maybe in football you got to work through special teams possibly, but in baseball, the expectation is that it's going to take you a minimum of 2 to 3 years. In most cases, at the very best, and some of those guys we're talking about, like because Bryant got drafted, he played a little bit at that first year after he got drafted, and he spent a full year, and then the other 11 days. But that's really quick. And then Kyle Schwarber, it was less than a year of full minor league time before he was up. Ian Happ was a little over a year. Javi Baez moved a little, not quite as fast because he was a high school guy. Albert Almora took a little bit more time. Obviously, we don't need to get into that, but pitchers in particular, guy we just talked to on Thursday, Scott Efros, right? Played in college, came in for a couple years, got converted over to sidearm, had to take a couple more years. So, you're talking about these guys making it up, and they're young for the sport or for their experience. But they're 25, 26, 27 years old in most of these cases. Again, we talked about Wisdom and Schwindel, right? Schwindel's blocked by a better first baseman or a seasoned first baseman, like at every stop along the way. You can look at his career. It's like, this guy always hit really well. Like, he's so good at every stop in the minors. Why didn't he get a shot? And you look around at all these guys at the teams between Texas and Kansas City, Minnesota, I think. Like, he was all over the place, constantly blocked by somebody. Or Detroit, not Minnesota. I knew it was AL Central.
And that's the thing is that these players, they don't know what their future looks like. They're in the minors, man. They don't know that they're going to be a star someday. They're trying to get there. They've got, lots of people telling them they can be a star someday, but their reality is that they're playing in the minor leagues at that moment in time. They don't know what the future brings. They could get injured. There's a number of things that can happen. And there's many, many players that are very, very good, major league level, that do not make it.
Yeah.
And it's just, and that's the thing. I don't know. I guess we could probably have
Yeah.
multiple
Well,
shows. We could have a series on this.
yeah, we can keep going through. But the other thing too is like these guys don't want to rock the boat, right? They got to be very careful because at that level, depending on unless you've made it to the point where you firmly establish yourself and you are a top draft pick bonus baby that the team will not give up on, they're going to be more than happy to cut you if they feel like you're being a problem. You're speaking out a little bit too much. There's a little bit something there they don't like. And the other side of that is it's not, we can talk about this being competitive industry and everybody's trying to look for the best players, but it's like one of those you'll never work in this town again things where if you develop a reputation and those owners, they don't like this guy or this general manager wants to badmouth somebody, your career could be ruined before it even gets started just because
they can legally do that because they have a monopoly, aka antitrust exemption. So it's,
and then it's you're 19 years old, you're 20 years old, and now what are you going to do? Even 20, or maybe you're 25, and now you're like, fuck, do I keep playing this? Do I give up on this sport? Do
I go till I'm 30?
Yeah, and so that's what's tough, man. It's amazing to me that somebody like a Schwindel or a Wisdom, or you could look at some other guys, were able to stick around as long as they were. Because I think some people would look at that and say, like, I don't think I'm ever going to get my shot. I got a family to support. Hey, my dad's got his insurance company. I can go back home, work for him. Just take that over and do that for the rest of my life, or do lessons or whatever. So anyway, I mean, I think it's just, there's a lot of players, and I just wonder, and maybe not, man, maybe every single player who's ever washed out early was never going to amount to anything anyway. And baseball, it would be the exact same if all these guys were getting paid more money at the lower levels and nothing would ever change. But I find that very hard to believe. I really do think, just from a psychological standpoint, let alone the physical stuff, that providing a little bit more security to these guys at those youngest ages as they're coming in and really doing everything you possibly can to take care of them would effectively change the sport, or at least be better. And hey, the Cubs have done a decent job of pumping a lot more money into. I know their nutrition program from the bottom up is significantly better, I think, than what you see with most organizations, or maybe everybody else has followed suit. I know the Cubs were one of the first ones to actually increase minimum pay for minor leaguers, even though it's still pretty low, all things considered, but they did make that increase, I think, a couple years ago. So, those things are good, but it's one thing, and I guess it's one thing to do something that's not really cool. It's another thing to argue for it and to steadfastly hold on to why it's a good thing to keep screwing these people over. Like, maybe when you get called out on it, maybe just be like, you know what, we're getting sued for this. Yeah, it'd probably be a good idea to just pay these dudes a little bit more and not go to court and not pay these high-priced law firms. I don't know.
It's like the owners hate their product. Like the arbitration process is exactly the same way, right? Where they come in and argue why they shouldn't pay, somebody who's been performing for them, for their team, because they make them sound bad because they point out their inefficiencies, and
you're so
the whole process.
Awful. We don't even want to pay you at all, but we really need you this year to step up, man.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's great.
They hate their product, but they like the money that their product makes for them. And they like the fact that they make more money in terms of the value that they extract from the product than the players who are actually the product. So this isn't just like a manufacturing process. These are people that are the product. And it's a little different. If you're just making widgets, you can try to make as much money as you can. Now, you want those margins to be huge, and good for you.
And the widget doesn't care about money. The widget doesn't need to buy food. It doesn't have a family. There's no baby widgets going around in there because widgets can't have sex. Little known fact. They don't even reproduce asexually, actually. I learned that just the other day.
Our Valentine's Day bonus content right there.
Exactly.
Widgets
cannot have sex. But yeah, if the players, if the people are the product, and I think and Major League Baseball seems to do a worse job of that than the other sports too, which is the funny thing about it. The other ones at least seem to recognize that. and we see them kind of negotiating along those lines. And so I don't know if it's just a product of how long baseball's been around, and it does feel different though. And I think that's kind of the thing, is like when you talk about fans, like fans don't look at it. There's nobody saying I could go out and play quarterback like Matthew Stafford or Tom Brady. Nobody's sitting there being like, yeah, dude, oh, I could be Andrew Whitworth and still playing O-line at 42 years old or whatever. Yeah, easily. Because you see those guys, they're like 6'7" and 375 pounds. There's massive mountains of human beings and NBA players, 7 foot tall, and you see what they're doing and dunking and jumping, and people are like, I could never do that. But, oh, hey, I used to be a really good high school player, or I hit 5 home runs in my beer league the other weekend, whatever. It's like, it's baseball. Like baseball inherently has that feel that to people that they could get around stuff. You know what I mean? That you could still do that these are not the same type of performers as in football and basketball, where I think people are seen as those are like freak elite individual athletes of this different order that could only do that one thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think fans,
yeah, I mean, baseball players are like
differently.
more like kind of like normal sized guys. Not all of them, but like
But
there
a
are a
lot
lot
of
of
them.
guys like Ben Zobrist, for example. He's like the guy next door, right? And yet
Yeah,
he
like
was an
Ryan
MVP of the World
Terrio,
Series.
Mike
Yeah, I
Fontenot.
mean,
You see these little tiny fellas walking around, like a lot of them, they put on just the, jeans and a t-shirt. You're not going to recognize them out on the street,
yeah,
because they don't have that. But like if you see, when I used to work in the city more frequent, so we'd see, like I worked at a Best Buy for a while, right up on the north side of town, and there'd be NBA players, and they're all like, when Greg Oden or when Shaq walks,
yeah.
they're like,
There's no missing him.
holy shit, like, yeah, and you knew who Shaq
His
was, but I
height
mean,
announces his
yeah,
presence.
but if a dude's 7 foot tall walking through there, even if it was like John Bender, or somebody like that, like you would know this is a different dude. But I will say this, like Bob Sanders was a safety for the Colts for a long time. Dude was like 5'7", 5'8", right? Real muscular. But if he came in wearing a hoodie and sweats, never would guess that that's a football player. And baseball players, by and large, are like that. Most of them just look like regular dudes. And I think that's that perception, whether people are conscious of it or not, I think is held against them by a good majority of the fans who are watching it.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation. So we have a question here, which I think is a good kind of question to address. Is where does each side need to kind of change, or what offer do they like? Let me rephrase this. So Manfred was talking about, hey, usually in these negotiations, there's like one thing that happens, and that's the catalyst to just kind of turn everything around. Right now, it's clear that nothing has happened there in any meaningful way, and there are some pretty big issues. I think the biggest issues seem to be the competitive balance tax, and where the spread there is. The owners are way lower and they're way more punitive on the penalties, whereas I think the players would be okay with maybe more penalties, but they want those ceilings to be way higher. And then there's the arbitration pool, so those to me seem to be the two biggest issues. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And I had mentioned this earlier, to where I think like the players have already moved, right? This is what I want to make really clear, because a lot of times we don't see this. And it depends on where you look, and the information is a little bit small. Like I haven't even seen what the actual changes would be for the CBT penalties, like how that would be different from what it is now. I don't have, I mean, I know, offhand where they are now, and they're, to be honest, they're not all that steep. That's why people are like, I love when people try to mansplain to me how the competitive balance tax penalties work, right? I'm like, I've written about this multiple times. Like, I feel like I understand. Do you know who I am? I'm not trying to do that, but I'm like, yes, I get it, but they're really not that punitive. All things considered at the low end. But players have already come off of trying to do age-based free agency, right? So they wanted a 30.5-year thing where as long as you had 5 years, if you hit that mark, you're a free agent, and then it was scaled down to 29.5. They already dropped that. They wanted to have some different revenue sharing things where the low end teams who were really not even trying to be competitive, that they would not receive as much, and they backed off of that. So the
And
players
the other day, he's like, to be fair, that's like asking them to take a pay cut. Yeah.
yeah, like I
Like,
don't know what
don't even go play poor. Like, you understand. Oh God, dear God forbid that the evil players ask the owners to
the
take
owner
a
should
pay
take a pay
cut and
cut.
stop getting subsidized for having teams in small markets. That's their decision.
Right. Like, you bought that team, right? And now, but
We
the
didn't
thing
make
is,
you buy the team.
the thing is, though, they want those teams, like whether it's Oakland or Tampa, they want to sit there and continue to reap all those competitive balance millions every year while not having to
Yeah.
put much into the payroll.
They
And then they can
basically
turn
have
around
a
and flip that
house
thing.
in a bad part of town, and they're getting subsidized for it.
Right. And they know that it's gonna that neighborhood's about to be gentrified in a couple years, and they can turn around and flip that house for 5 times what they bought it for. All they've got to do is sit back in the meanwhile and let the asset appreciate and wait for that moment. So I think it's the CBT. The owners, either one way or the other, either need to lower the penalties back to where they were, or even less, or they need to meaningfully increase, because right now they've gone up to, I think it would be 214 million for the first 2 years, and 216, 218, 222 is what it would do. So again, you're talking about overall an increase of $8 million over 5 years, right? So as we mentioned before, not even going to keep pace with inflation. So I think the players wanted like 240 is where they wanted it. I don't think it goes that high.
245.
That's right. And then I think did it come down to 243?
Up to 273 5 years later.
So that's where the 3 was. And so, hey, does it go to 225 and maybe scale up a little bit from there? Right. That it's possible they could get there. And then he said, I think it's a combination of, there's a lot of points in it, but I will say the pay for players years 1 to 3. Whether that's and that's a combination of minimum salary and the bonus pool, because that stuff all goes together. It all apply to those 1 to 3 players. So I think, they could keep a lower base pay if they pump up the bonus pool, but I think it would be more amenable to players because that bonus pool is only going to be shared by a fairly select few players. The one that impacts the most is raising overall the minimum salary. So I think if owners were to say, all right, 700,000 minimum salary and a $50 million bonus pool, I bet that would get it done. I think that would get it done. But right now they're at like 630 and 15 million. So
and the writing's on the wall with that. And that's the thing is that, like, I'd be surprised if it doesn't. Listen, at some point they're going to agree, and they will restart baseball. It's even if they cancel the whole season, which would be completely disastrous. And speaking of that, you want to know what it's like running a blog for a sport that doesn't.
It's a lot of fun, man.
Really,
well, the only thing to write about is this stuff.
Yeah,
and I can tell you,
we are talking about it.
Nobody gives a shit to read about like 2 or 3 people. I did have some people comment. They were like, "Oh, I really, your writing's good. I like this stuff." I'm like, "That's cool," but it's Super Bowl weekend, and the only thing I've got to write about is where the players and the owners differ in their negotiations. And I can tell you that for a Cubs specific site, that is not something that draws a whole hell of a lot of eyeballs. Just no. Oddly enough, right? Who'd have thunk it?
Strange how that works. So we're at a position where spring training is delayed. We are, or is
they could all show up tomorrow. They can get it done right now. No,
is going to be delayed, which bothers me, obviously, because I'm down here in Phoenix, and it's always a great time. We got some people coming down from Chicago all the time, and it's just a good time to be in Arizona. It's always a good time to be in Arizona, but that's a better time to be in Arizona, and so that's delayed. And then we're getting to a point where I think we've got 2, maybe 3 weeks for them to work out a deal, which is not unheard of. I mean, like you were just saying, it's obvious where they need to be. 50 million is probably the right place for them to be. And then some version of, wherever they're going to come in at on the competitive balance tax. it it seems like it's very it's going to happen, right? But it's like, how long do they stand there and wait to get to the number? I mean, are the owners so serious with this low ball kind of 10-15 million dollar number for the arbitration pool that they're not going to come up to 50 million? Because it seems like that should be the number. If you're at 100 and you've got one down here around 10-15, it's
Yeah.
typically a meet in the middle type of thing.
That's some, and like I said, I think that is probably secondary. If I had to guess, and I don't know this, and on those rooms, obviously with the players, I would guess that bonus pool is probably secondary to the salary itself, like the minimum salary itself, just because of the impact that it has. Because you're talking about the minimum salary very literally impacts every single player who comes into Major League Baseball. Because at one point, even if you only play under it for that first year and then you get an extension, you played for that minimum. And as you mentioned, 60% of active players the last 2 years have been in that year 1 to 3 pool. And so now you're talking about at any one time, you are impacting a majority of the players in your sport just with that one thing. Whereas that, you're talking about, well, like rookie of the year, Cy Young, MVP, and then, maybe some war-based accomplishments that could fit into that bonus pool. So, but you talk about guys in that first 3 years, you're talking about if they're top 3, even if every single finisher for every award was a year 1 to 3 player, you're talking about like 18 guys. If you're looking at both leagues and the awards for each of those, that would be, which is not possible, right? We're not going to, probably not going to see to where there's no veterans, no guys past their 4th year in the league that are in those spots. But you're talking about maybe splitting that between 10 to 15 to 20 players if the war calculations fit in there. So again, is that like $1 million bonus that those guys will be getting, $1.5 million, something in that neighborhood, to get spread out, or maybe it's less if they factor war. But anyway, I think if the owners were to give up a little bit more on those fronts, I think a deal gets done pretty quickly, because the rest of the stuff, like, honestly, hey, they've already got the draft picks in there. There's a few other, like, the sticking points aren't that many. It's just they're really big in those 2 primary areas. So we're talking about the front end with the 1 to 3 and the back end of the CBT.
And not every team has the same perspective, right?
Right.
I mean, the New York Yankees certainly have a different view on this than the Oakland A's, or, well, maybe that's not the best team to use.
Yeah.
Maybe Minnesota Twins. A small market team is going to have a way different view on the competitive balance tax than a large market team. And the large market team is probably fine with the number going way up, but you've got a what is it, 8 to 10 small market teams that benefit from the
at a minimum,
the
right?
revenue share.
Yeah, and they don't want it to go up, because they're saying, well, that's just that we can't be that competitive. Like, well,
They're never going to pay that.
Yeah.
So they're never going to get to those amounts. So they don't want, the higher those amounts go, the higher salaries go, which is what the players want. But the harder it is for them to make money with the whole revenue share, kind of the way that's all set up. And
because if the ceiling goes up, then they're saying, well, it's less likely for teams to hit it. Now they're not getting penalized. We don't get to split that part of the money. Now they'll still get some of it, but the last thing I'll say on this too, there's an article that's out there that Matt Snyder from CBS Sports shared. I don't know if this is the same one that was out a couple years ago or last year, or if he's just resharing that again. If there's something new that's out there, you'll have to go to my Twitter timeline to see it. I don't have it up here, but a lot of people mistakenly believe that having a salary cap is going to create more parity in the sport. Parity, Parity, not parody. Just in case I'm not enunciating very well, but if you look at it, like baseball and football and the NBA, like, really there's no, because the NBA has a salary cap, NFL has a hard cap. Major League Baseball is not like it's not as if you're seeing. I mean, the Yankees aren't winning the World Series every year. It's not like that, you're seeing the Rays be competitive from time to time. You're seeing some of these come in here. But if you look that up, it's very interesting, because it breaks down by years and markets and all this stuff, how, the fallacy of a salary cap really creating parity in those leagues. And so I think it's interesting, and it's a notion that if you but the owners want you to believe that, right? The owners want you to believe that they need that in place to level the playing field, and it's simply not true.
They need it in place so that they could pay the players less money and make more money.
Exactly.
Just so we're all clear.
Yeah. That's it.
So, yeah, that's it. So that's a good way to end the show. I think the owners are greedy, and their arrogance is on full display in this latest offer. And we'll see. Obviously, we'll keep everyone posted on the website. The players, I think, will come back with something this week, maybe, but there's no guarantee there.
I got to think it's coming pretty soon. I mean, there's not much they got to change, but I think they'll try to come back with it. Hopefully soon.
I assume it'll be the same offer that they made before this most recent. I'll be surprised if they make any movement. I mean, maybe they come down.
I can see them coming down like a little bit more in the bonus pool. I can see them coming down a little bit on their minimum,
like $5 million.
Yeah, and it goes down to 95.
They'll just keep going $5 million at a time until they finally get to 50
or 725 or something like that. Right?
There's a quicker way to do this.
Yeah, we'll see.
Just go right to the midpoint.
Yeah, just boop, done. But the players don't want to do that. They don't want to be the ones that give. Neither side wants to be the one that like gives to that point that has to. Like they want the owners want the players to come to their position and vice versa.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It'll just keep going. But if that's the case, then fuck, dude, meet for more than an hour, or like meet and circle back and come back and get back at the table again.
Yeah, exactly.
Different. This is down for an hour. And it's like 3 days later.
It doesn't have to be like separate meetings. It can be like you can meet and talk about things and have things that you agree on, and then walk out and then talk about more things and then come back in and
keep the conference line open, boys. Let's go. Let's
get this baby moving.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll circle back next week, just depending on what happens this week. Either way, you guys have a good week, and we will see you soon.
Go. See you, everybody.
Peace.